Well, I have a confession to make, and that is that I've never made a gingerbread house in my life. And here I am speaking at a gingerbread house event. So maybe I'll have to rectify that sometime in the future. But thank you for pausing a while and allowing me to speak tonight. My name is Mirrilee, and I don't live in Australia, I live in the Middle East. But I used to be a member of the church that is hosting this event. So I hope you have a really good time tonight. I've been thinking about this question, and I wonder whether you have too. And that is, have there been any big reveal moments this past year for you? Now, it might sound like a strange question, but the reason I ask it is because I think that the year 2020 has been so unusual for all of us, and not just on the Peninsula, not just in Australia, but around the world. Many of us have had similar experiences that leads us to think that actually it's been like a big reveal of our priorities and our values, and that many of us have experienced the same thing around the world. So I often think it's a bit like shining a torchlight and seeing what's underneath, seeing what's revealed by the spotlight. Sometimes I take a torchlight if I've lost something, and I look underneath the furniture, and I'm always surprised by what I find. And come with me on this little talk and think about this idea of shining a spotlight on different parts of your life. Well, I think for many people this past year, shining a spotlight has been on the creative skills and secret talents that many people have. I don't know about you, but I have friends who discover that they're amazing in the kitchen. I have a friend called Josiah, and when he spent time under lockdown in the country that I live in, he found himself whipping up croissants or croissants, sourdough bread. He was making burgers from scratch, even the burger buns as well. His flatmates did not complain, I can tell you that. And he had no idea that he was such a good chef. Maybe you found new ways to connect this year. Our online life meant that many of us have discovered Zoom and Teams, and whilst it can be frustrating, actually for many people it's been a great way to connect, and people have caught up with family members and friends and colleagues. I have some friends who play board games online, not under aliases, but just played board games with their friends over Zoom, and they had a great time. But actually for many of us there's also been Zoom fatigue, and the online life has been quite stressful, and it wasn't our chosen thing at all. A friend of mine called Simone, she is a mum of 3 girls, and she's also a primary school teacher. And when the government suddenly announced that she needed to try and teach online as well as looking after her 3 young girls, she found it exhausting and really stressful, and her school honestly wasn't equipped to do an online education. I have another friend called Emily, and she was so looking forward to attending her sister's wedding, and but unfortunately she had to watch it on Zoom from her living room rather than with the Alps of Switzerland in the background. Because of COVID-19, she wasn't able to travel, and she was bitterly disappointed, even though the day was a beautiful day. After all, the events of our lives that are really beautiful, happy, or sad, they're designed to be shared with people that we love. And so this year has taken a toll on many of our relationships. But when I asked a friend of mine, Judith, what her summary of the year had been, and I'd asked the same question I'm asking you guys, have there been any big reveal moments? She came back to me with just one word: division. It was unprompted. I was surprised by her response, but she said that she also had been surprised by the amount of division there had been in her community and in her family and with colleagues. And she wasn't expecting people to be so divided about the government's response to COVID. Should there be lockdowns? Shouldn't there be? And how people respond to it even within their own families. And I think actually the added stress of this year has been a bit like shining a spotlight on some of the cracks in our relationships. And perhaps you've also experienced this. What do you do when the spotlight is shone and it reveals cracks maybe within your family or between friends or colleagues, maybe even worse in your own marriage? Well, I wonder what this past year has revealed to you. For me, I'll be honest, it revealed that I was more anxious than I expected to be. I found myself getting quite anxious about Corona. And not only that, but I discovered that I'm not as patient as I thought I was. And I can even be passive aggressive, which I was ashamed to realize. I realized that I could easily get frustrated, that sometimes I'm quite a rule keeper when I didn't realize I was such a rule keeper. I think when our plans are disrupted, it's wearing, and certainly my travel plans were changed many times. And I think the big reveal for me, when the dust was blowing off and I saw what was underneath, was that actually I'm not maybe the person I thought I was. I'm not as patient or as kind as I wanted to be. So what do you do if the big reveal is actually bad news? Like, what do you do if the big reveal isn't the news you were hoping for? Well, you could go into 2021 and think, well, you know what? 2021 is a new year for you, it's a new year for me, and we're just going to be a better version of ourselves. And that wouldn't be a bad thing to think about, the things that can be changed as you come into a new year. I'm all for New Year's resolutions. But actually, I want to encourage you not just to put the spotlight on yourself or on what you could change or on the cracks that you've seen in your relationships, but I want to encourage you to put a spotlight on something better, on someone better. Well, I want to encourage you to put the spotlight on Jesus. Now that might sound strange, it might sound cheesy or awkward, but I'll tell you why. I think it's actually because when there's a big reveal, and Christmas is about a big reveal, it's about Jesus coming to earth, God in human form. When there's a big reveal, it's actually worth us thinking about where the good news is. And I think for Jesus, the good news isn't just that he was this wonderful man with great morals for our children, but actually his good news, his presence in this world, is actually good news for you, and it's good news for me. And it's much better than any new fix-it job I can do on myself in 2021. But then you might be thinking, you know what, honestly, we've done really well this year. Aussies have done it so good. You know, our healthcare workers have worked so hard, and they have. I'm so impressed with the many long hours they put in to try and prevent Corona. Many moved out from home just to try and protect their loved ones. Our high schoolers have been doing online schooling. Even the year 12ers have had to relinquish their expectations for this year. It's been hard. There have been many acts of kindnesses between neighbours. I love these stories, and I'm proud of how people have performed under the pressure of 2020, caring to care for each other. But I also don't want us to be too pleased with ourselves. I don't want us just to land there and think that the cracks aren't that bad, or, you know what, it's okay, it's no big deal. There's a famous writer called C.S. Lewis, and he said, it's a bit like a child making mud pies in a slum, so busy with that they can't imagine the possibility of a holiday at the seaside. And I think that rings true for me, that sometimes we settle too quickly and we're not willing to really consider what the good news is that's available to us. I'd like to tell you a story of an ordinary man who I really resonate with. This is a man who really valued his friends, and he's the kind of guy that maybe we can relate to. He often spoke before he thought, and he often jumped before he looked, and he was kind of well known for that. But at the same time, he seemed to have a good heart. But one day, under great pressure and great stress, he let his closest friend down. He betrayed him, he disowned him, he spoke badly about him. And as a result, he wasn't there when his friend wanted him to be there. In fact, his friend died. And afterwards, when he was reflecting on this, he went away and he wept and he wept and he wept. You may know the story. That man's name was Peter and his friend was Jesus. And the Bible says that he wept bitterly when he realized what he'd done. Actually, I feel like that's like us. Under great pressure and great stress, we're not always who we want to be. And Peter wasn't who he wanted to be. But what do you do in that situation? When you're exposed, when that spotlight on yourself reveals truth and you're ashamed of who you are. Well, again, I want to take the spotlight off you and I want to put it onto Jesus, because he does not need to be ashamed when he's under the spotlight. We squirm, but he does not need to hide from the fact checkers. We're not made up of our best successes or of our worst failures. That isn't who Peter was. That isn't who we are. When we allow Jesus to be under the spotlight in our own lives, it's Jesus that is reflected in us and not our worst cracks. We're defined by Jesus' perfect record and not by ourselves. So as you look back on 2020 with all the experiences that you've had that have been felt globally by me here in the Middle East, by you guys in Australia, I'd love to ask you if there has been a big reveal. And I think it's a great question to ask, even if you don't land with the same conclusions that I've landed with. But I'd also love you to be brave, and I'd love you to be willing to step outside your usual box and consider putting Jesus under that spotlight. And I really hope there have been beautiful memories this year, not just stressful ones. I hope there have been funny memories. But I also encourage you to consider putting Jesus under that spotlight and find out why it is that he can stand up to scrutiny, why it is that he doesn't hide or squirm or feel ashamed from the fact checkers in the way that we might feel. I'd love to make a little plug, if that's okay. The church that has hosted this event, they do have a couple of Christmas Eve services, and they also have a regular Sunday service. And I get that Christians can be pretty weird sometimes, but I also think that it's worth visiting. And so if you ever want to pop into church and just sit at the back, you're very welcome. And in January, there's a couple of events happening. There's Summerfest, which is an event at the beach, and that will be for children and adults. I've been along and I was surprised how good the speakers were actually for adults, so I can highly recommend it. And then there'll also be a course. It's a 6-week course and it's called Life, and it's a great opportunity to explore who Jesus is and to put him under the spotlight and find out why his good news is good news for all of us. You won't be made to stand up and speak or have to do anything scary. It's really just to find out who Jesus is and put him under the spotlight. So I encourage you to think about those things. But thank you so much for listening to me tonight. And if you ever see me, please do come and say hello, because I don't know who's actually going to be in this event. But I do want to wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
journey